My name is Delia Fontaine. I am 42 years old, and the last thing my father said to me before he died was not goodbye. It was not I love you. It was not any of the things that dying people say in the movies when the room is quiet and the light is right and everyone has gathered in time. What my father said to me 3 days before he died was this. He said, "Delia, the blue box is in the attic, 3rd shelf from the left, behind the Christmas things. Do not let your brother find it before you do." I was holding his hand. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic, and the specific warm staleness of a room where someone has been for a long time. His hand was lighter than I remembered hands being, and the IV line ran from his wrist to the bag above the bed with the particular mechanical patience of something that is doing its job regardless of the outcome. I said, "What's in the blue box, Daddy?" He said, "Everything they told you wasn't yours." He closed his eyes. He did not open them again in any way that meant something. He died on a Thursday morning at 4:47. I was in the chair beside his bed. My brother Marcus was in the parking lot on a phone call he had stepped out for 20 minutes earlier and had not returned from. My mother was in the cafeteria, getting coffee she had not needed. I was the one in the room. I have been the one in the room my entire life. The blue box was on the 3rd shelf from the left, behind the Christmas things, exactly where he said it would be. I found it 4 days after the funeral on a Tuesday afternoon, while my mother was at the grocery store, and my brother was at the attorney's office, asking questions about the estate that I had not been invited to, and had not been told about. What was in the blue box rearranged 42 years of my understanding of my own family, in the time it took me to read 11 pages of handwritten notes, 3 legal documents, and a letter my father had written to me 14 years earlier and never sent. Before I take you into that attic, and into that blue box, and into the 42 years that preceded both, I need you to do something. I need you to think about the thing in your family that everyone understood, but no one named, and the thing that shaped how the money moved, and who was consulted, and whose achievements were celebrated, and whose were quietly minimized. The thing that you felt in the room, but could never quite see clearly enough to hold up to the light. Think about that thing, and stay with me, because this story is about what happens when the thing that was always there is finally, irreversibly, put in your hands. Like this video, subscribe to Silent Will Stories. Drop your city and the time in the comments tonight. I need to know who is here for this one, because this is the story I have been building toward for 2 years, and I need it to land somewhere real. Now let me take you back. Not to the attic, not to the hospital room. Let me take you back 37 years, to a kitchen in Natchitoches, Louisiana, into a table where a 5-year-old girl was doing long division in a composition notebook, while her mother braided her sister's hair, and her father watched the news, and her older brother Marcus sat across from her eating cereal out of the box, because he was 11, and cereal out of the box was the kind of thing 11-year-old boys considered a statement. The 5-year-old was me. The long division was real. My 3rd grade teacher, a woman named Mrs. Elvira Tirode, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and who had taught at the same elementary school for 26 years, and who had the specific gift of recognizing a child who was running ahead of the curriculum and needed a longer track, had given me the composition notebook and the long division problems on a Friday, and told me to bring it back Monday, and I had finished it Saturday morning. My father had checked it. He had sat across the table from me with the notebook open and a pencil in his hand, and he had gone through every problem. He was an accountant. Numbers were his particular language, and the sight of a 5-year-old working through long division with the specific focused pleasure of someone who found the process genuinely satisfying made him put the pencil down and look at me with an expression I have carried for 42 years. He said, "Delia, you've got a head for this." I said, "For what?" He said, "For seeing how things fit together. It's the most important thing a person can have." My mother looked up from the braid she was working on. She said, "Douglas, don't put ideas in her head." My father said, "What ideas?" My mother said, "You know what ideas." She went back to the braid, yet I went back to the notebook. But I have thought about that exchange every year since. What ideas? You know what ideas. The specific and practiced way two people can have an entire conversation in 6 words about something that has been between them for years, without the child at the table, understanding she is the subject. I understand it now. It took a blue box and a Thursday morning at 4:47 and 42 years of the thing nobody named. But I understand it now. Let me tell you about the Fontaine family, because the family is the architecture, and the architecture is what makes everything else make sense. My father, Douglas Fontaine, was the son of a man who had worked in the oil fields of northwest Louisiana for 30 years, and who had saved every dollar that did not go directly to the necessities of keeping 6 children alive, and had used those savings to buy a small piece of commercial real estate in Natchitoches in 1971. A strip of 3 storefronts on Front Street, modest, nothing remarkable, but paid for in full, and therefore a different category of thing than anything else the Fontaine family had previously owned. My grandfather, whose name was also Douglas, and who everyone called Big Douglas, to distinguish him from my father, who was called Little Douglas until he was 43, and Big Douglas died, and the distinction became unnecessary. I'd understood something about that piece of property that he communicated to my father in a way that my father spent the rest of his life trying to communicate to me. He said, "This property doesn't earn you anything while you sit on it. It earns you the right to sit at the table where the real conversations happen. That's worth more than the rent." My father became an accountant. He worked for 28 years at a firm in Shreveport before starting his own practice. He was meticulous and patient, and he had the specific trust of clients who knew that the numbers he gave them were numbers he had checked 3 times and would stake his reputation on. He was also the quiet center of the Fontaine family, not the loudest voice, the most reliable one, the one who was consulted, and the one who knew where things were, and what they meant, and how they connected to what had come before. He had 2 children, Marcus, who was 6 years older than me, who had their father's ease with people, and their mother's confidence, and who had spent his entire adult life in a comfortable proximity to success, without ever quite arriving at it. And me, who had their father's head for numbers, and their grandfather's understanding that the property earns you the right to sit at the table. From the time I was old enough to carry a folder, I helped my father at his practice after school. Not officially, not paid. In the way of daughters in families where the work is the education, so I sat at the desk in the corner of his office, and I learned the filing system and the billing structure and the specific language of trust documents and estate plans and the particular conversations that happen when families have to decide what they are going to do with what they have built. I understood tax law by the time I was 16, not theoretically, in the specific applied way of someone who has spent 3 years watching it operate on real documents belonging to real families. Marcus played football. Marcus went to parties. Marcus was easy and warm and magnetic and filled every room he entered with the specific energy of someone who has never once doubted his right to be there. My parents were proud of both of us. They showed it differently. For Marcus, pride was expressed loudly, at dinner tables, and in the hearing of extended family. In the particular way my mother said "your brother" when talking to her friends, which carried in it the weight of an achievement she was presenting to the world. For me, pride was expressed privately, between my father and me, in the office after school, in the specific satisfaction of a problem solved correctly, in the look across the table when I had gotten something right that most adults did not get right. I did not understand, for a very long time, that these were different sizes of the same thing. I understood it eventually. The understanding arrived in a blue box on the 3rd shelf from the left. I need to tell you about my mother before I go further, because this story is not honest without her. And the honest version of my mother is the most complicated thing in it. Gloria Fontaine was 68 years old when my father died. She had been beautiful in the way that certain women are beautiful all their lives. Not the kind that fades with age, but the kind that becomes more itself with age. The specific beauty of a woman who has always known her own presence in a room and has learned to use it with precision. She had married my father at 22. She had given up a scholarship to Xavier University in New Orleans to do so, which she mentioned at intervals throughout my childhood with the specific frequency of someone who needs the mention to serve as both explanation and accusation. She had given up the scholarship. She had built a home. She had raised 2 children. And she had supported my father's practice in the specific and largely invisible way that wives of that generation and that community supported their husbands' work. She was not a bad person. I want to be absolutely clear about this, because the story I am about to tell you could be read as a story about a bad person, and that is not the story. My mother loved me. I have never doubted that she loved me. What I doubted, for many years, and what the blue box confirmed, was whether she had been capable of seeing me clearly through the specific distortion of her relationship with Marcus. Marcus was her firstborn. Marcus was her son. In my mother's understanding of the world, which had been shaped by the specific community and generation and set of expectations she had been born into, and sons were the center of family continuity, and daughters were the support structure. This was not a belief she had examined. It was the air she had breathed since childhood, and that she had passed on without awareness that it was a thing separate from truth. She loved me. She also, consistently, and without malice, arranged the family in the way her assumptions required. Marcus was consulted about things. I was informed of decisions. Marcus's career choices were discussed at the dinner table with the engaged attention of people considering something important. My career choices were received with the particular warmth that adults reserve for children who have done something impressive that the adults do not entirely understand. When my father's practice needed someone to run the billing during a difficult stretch in the mid-90s, I did it. For 2 years, on evenings and weekends, around my own job and my own life. My mother told the extended family that Douglas had gotten the practice sorted out. I had sorted it out. When the Front Street properties needed to be refinanced to take advantage of a rate drop in 2006, I structured the refinancing. I found the lender. I prepared the documentation. I managed the process from beginning to end. My mother told the cousins that Douglas had made a smart move with the properties. My father knew what I had done. He told me so. In the office, across the desk, in the private language of two people who share a specific competence and the particular satisfaction of a thing done correctly. He did not tell my mother to correct the record. That is the part that took me the longest to understand. Not why my mother arranged things the way she did. I understood that. The air she had breathed, the assumptions she had never examined. Why my father had allowed the arrangement to continue for 40 years without correction. The blue box answered that question. In the letter he had written 14 years earlier and never sent. I need to tell you about my friend Cecile before I tell you about the attic. Cecile Arsenault had been my closest friend since we were 7 years old and had been placed in adjacent desks in the 2nd grade at St. Mary's Elementary in Natchitoches. She was the kind of friend who combined absolute loyalty with the specific gift of telling you things you needed to hear in a way that left you feeling stronger rather than diminished. She was a family law attorney in Baton Rouge, and she was the person I called from the grocery store parking lot on the afternoon I came down from the attic with the blue box in my hands. She answered on the first ring. I said, "Cecile, I found something." She said, "What kind of something?" I said, "The kind that changes the shape of everything." She said, "I'm coming." I said, "You don't have to." She said, "I'm already putting on my coat." She arrived at my mother's house 3 hours later. I had not opened the box again in the interim. I had set it on the kitchen table and sat across from it and drunk 2 cups of tea that went cold because I kept forgetting to drink them, and thought about my father's hand on mine in the hospital room and the specific weight of what he had said. "Do not let your brother find it before you do." Cecile sat down across from the blue box. She said, "Tell me what's in it before I look." I told her. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Delia, have you called Marcus?" I said, "Not yet." She said, "Good. Don't. Not until we know what we have." She put on her reading glasses. She opened the box. We went through everything together. Cecile reading the legal documents, me reading the handwritten notes, both of us reading the letter at the end. It took 40 minutes. When we finished, Cecile took off her reading glasses and set them on the table and looked at me with the expression of someone who has just read a very long legal document and has understood every word and is deciding how to explain what she understood to someone who is not a lawyer. She said, "Delia, your grandfather's property, the Front Street storefronts." I said, "Yes," and she said, "Your father owned them as executor of your grandfather's estate, but the estate documents name 2 beneficiaries." I said, "Marcus and me." She said, "Equally, 50% each. Your grandfather wrote it that way specifically. In 1987. I looked at the box. She said, "Your father has been managing the properties for 35 years. All income has gone into the family account. Your mother and your father have been using the income from a property that is 50% yours." I said, "Did they know?" She said, "Your father knew." She picked up the letter. She said, Your mother may not have known the specific legal structure, but your father knew from the day your grandfather died. I said, "Why didn't he tell me?" Cecile looked at the letter. She said, "He tells you in here." Let me tell you what my father wrote. That the letter was 14 pages, handwritten, in the small, precise accountant's handwriting I had known my entire life. It was dated March of 2009. I was 27 at the time. My father was 58. He had not been ill. He had simply, he wrote, reached the point of understanding that some things needed to be written down before the writing became impossible. He began with my grandfather's property. He explained the estate documents. He explained the equal split. He explained that from the time he became executor, he had managed the properties as a family asset, because that was how his own father had treated them during his lifetime, and because changing that arrangement would have required conversations he had not known how to have. He meant conversations with my mother, and he wrote, "Your mother does not believe she has treated you and Marcus differently. She would be genuinely hurt to know that you have experienced it that way. I am telling you this not to excuse it, but to help you understand it. Gloria has never been cruel. She has been shaped, and the shaping happened before I knew her, and I have not been brave enough to undo it in the years since." He wrote, "You have been doing the work of this family's finances for most of your adult life. Not all of it visible, most of it invisible. I have watched you do it, and I have thanked you privately, and I have failed to require that you be thanked publicly. That is my failure, not your mother's, mine. Because I knew what you were doing, and I let the credit go elsewhere because allowing the correction would have required a conflict I was not willing to have." And he wrote, "The property is yours, equally. Marcus does not know this. Your mother does not understand the legal structure in the way I do. When I am gone, you will need to decide what to do with this information. I am not telling you what to do. I am making sure you have what you need to decide." He wrote, "Delia, you have always had the clearest head in this family, and I have always known it, and I have not always honored it the way I should have. I am sorry for that. Not in the way of people who say sorry when they mean nothing by it. In the way of a man who knows specifically what he failed to do, and who is writing it down at 58 years old, because he does not know how many years he has left to say the things that should have been said." He wrote, "You see how things fit together, so it is still the most important thing a person can have. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Not after I am gone. Not ever." He signed it the way he signed everything. Douglas Raymond Fontaine, Sr. His full name, the way he signed documents that were meant to last. I sat at my mother's kitchen table with the letter in my hands for a long time. Cecile did not speak. The kitchen was quiet in the way of houses where someone has recently died, the specific quality of silence that settles when the person who made the most sound in a room is no longer making it. I said, "He wrote this in 2009 and kept it for 14 years. Cecile said, "Yes." I said, "He could have told me." She said, "Yes." I said, "He chose to write it down instead." She said, "He chose to make sure you had it, even if he couldn't find the way to say it while he was alive." And I looked at the letter. I looked at my grandfather's estate documents. I looked at the blue box. Then I looked at Cecile. I said, "What do I do now?" She said, "You take as much time as you need to understand what you want, and then we figure out how to get there. Here is something I want you to understand. Before I go further, the money is real, and the legal situation is real, and those things matter in ways I will get to. But the money is not the center of the story. The center of the story is something smaller and more essential than the money. The center of the story is the 5-year-old at the kitchen table doing long division in the composition notebook, while her mother said, "Don't put ideas in her head," and her father said nothing in response. And what that silence accumulated into over 37 years, and what it cost the 5-year-old, who grew into the woman who ran the family's finances in the evening and on weekends, and who structured the refinancing and sorted out the billing, and who was thanked privately and credited publicly with nothing. The center of the story is what my father knew, and what he failed to correct, and what he tried to fix, 14 years too late. In a 14-page letter, he put in a blue box on the 3rd shelf, from the left, behind the Christmas things. The center of the story is what I was going to do with what he had given me. Not the property, the truth. I went to see my mother on a Friday afternoon, 10 days after the attic. Cecile had offered to come. I said no. This conversation needed to be between my mother and me. Not because I was protecting her from the presence of a lawyer, because the most important thing that needed to happen in that conversation was not legal. It was personal. And personal conversations require the specific vulnerability of 2 people without witnesses. My mother was in the garden when I arrived. She had a garden on the south side of the house that she had been tending for 30 years. The specific patient garden of someone who understands that tending is the whole work, and that the growing happens independently of your anxiety about it. She was deadheading the roses when I came around the corner of the house. She looked up. She said, "You didn't call." I said, "I needed to talk to you, and I was afraid if I called I would lose my nerve." She looked at me for a moment. She set down the clippers. She said, "Come inside." We sat at the kitchen table. She made tea. She made tea the way she made everything, with the deliberate efficiency of someone who has been making things for other people for 50 years, and who does it as its own kind of language. 2 cups. Honey on the side, because she knew I used it, and she always had it. I put the blue box on the table. She looked at it. She said, "Your father told you." It was not a question. I said, "Not while he was alive. He wrote it down." She reached out and touched the box with 2 fingers, the specific touch of someone who recognizes an object they have known about for a long time. I said, "You knew the box existed." She said, "I knew there was something. He kept things. He always kept things." She said, "I didn't know what was in it." She looked at me. She said, "Tell me." I told her about the estate documents, about the equal split, and about 35 years of property income, about the letter. Not every word of the letter, the parts that belonged to her. She listened the way my mother listened to difficult things, with the stillness of a woman who has survived a great many difficult things, and who has learned that stillness is the most effective response because it preserves the energy you will need afterward. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. She said, "Douglas should have told me." I said, "Yes." She said, "He was protecting you." I said, "He was protecting the peace." I'm not sure I was the one he was protecting. She flinched. Small. She was not a woman who flinched visibly often. She said, "Delia, I know I have not always been fair." I looked at my mother. She said, "I know I have not always seen you the way your father saw you." and I have known it for a long time, and I have not known what to do with the knowing." She said, "I wanted to be fair. I believed I was fair. I think I was wrong about what fair looked like." She pressed both hands flat on the table. Her hands were her mother's hands, the specific architecture of a Creole Louisiana woman's hands, strong and fine-boned at the same time. She said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to tell Marcus." She said, "He won't take it well." I said, "I know." She said, "He's going to think this is about money." I said, "It's about a record that was not kept accurately for 35 years. The money is part of that record." She said, "And what do you want from him?" I said, "I want him to know what I have been doing for this family that he did not know I was doing. Not so he feels guilty, so the record is accurate, and so we can decide together what comes next, without me being invisible in the conversation the way I have been invisible in the family's accounting for my entire adult life." My mother looked at me. She said, "That's your father talking." I said, "I know. He taught me how." She picked up her tea. She held the cup in both hands. She said, "I clapped at the wrong things for too long." I said, "Mama." She said, "I did. I know I did." She looked at me with the specific expression of a woman who is seeing something she has been not quite seeing for 40 years, and who is finding the experience both necessary and painful in equal measure. She said, "You've been in this family's rooms doing the work, while I pointed everyone's attention elsewhere." I said yes. She said, "I'm sorry, Delia." She said it the way my father had written it, and in the way of someone who knows specifically what they failed to do, and is naming it without deflection. I received it. I did not say it was fine. It was not fine. I said, "I know you are, and I think we can do something better with what's left." She nodded. She said, "Tell me how." The conversation with Marcus happened 2 weeks after the conversation with my mother. I had asked her to be present, not to manage Marcus, because I wanted someone in the room who had already had the conversation with herself, and who could therefore be a witness to the truth, rather than a defender of the old story. Marcus arrived at the house at 10 in the morning on a Saturday. He came in the way he always came into my mother's house, with the easy confidence of someone for whom this space has always been entirely welcoming. He kissed my mother's cheek, and he squeezed my arm. He sat at the kitchen table with the specific relaxed posture of a man who has not yet understood that the morning is going to require something of him. I placed the documents on the table. Not all of them. The estate documents, the property records, a summary Cecile had prepared of the income generated over 35 years, and how it had flowed. I did not place the letter on the table. The letter was between my father and me. It would stay there. I said, "Marcus, I need to tell you some things about grandfather's property." He looked at the documents. He looked at me. He said, "What is this?" I said, "It's grandfather's estate documents from 1987. He left the Front Street properties to Daddy, and to both of us equally. 50% to you, and 50% to me. And Daddy has been managing the income as a family asset for 35 years. Marcus looked at the papers. He said, "I knew about the properties." I said, "Did you know I had an equal ownership stake?" He looked at me. Something shifted in his expression. He said, "Daddy managed them." I said, "Yes, he managed them. But the ownership is mine and yours in equal shares. And there are some other things I need you to know." I told him about the billing work, the 2 years in the 90s, the refinancing in 2006, the ongoing bookkeeping I had done for the practice for 3 decades, not as a grievance list, as an accounting, the specific and factual accounting that I had been trained by my father to prepare, and that I owed to this conversation. Marcus listened. He was quiet in a way he was not usually quiet, and he said, "I didn't know you did the refinancing." I said, "I know." He said, "Mama told me Daddy handled it." I said, "I know she did." He looked at our mother. She said, "Marcus, your father let me tell the story that way. I was wrong to tell it that way. I didn't always see what Delia was doing. And when I did see it, I didn't always make sure you saw it too." Marcus looked at the table. He said, "Why are you telling me this now?" I said, "Because Daddy is gone, and the estate needs to be settled correctly, and I cannot participate in settling it correctly if the baseline understanding of what belongs to whom is not accurate, and because I am 42 years old, and I am done being invisible in conversations about this family's finances, when I have been doing the family's financial work since I was 16. He said nothing for a moment, and then he said something I was not certain he was capable of saying. He said, "How much work have you actually done?" It was the right question, not defensive, genuine. The question of someone who is beginning to understand that there is a picture he has not been seeing, and who wants to see it. I told him, specifically, with numbers, because numbers were the language my grandfather had understood, and my father had given me, and that I was now using in the room where the real conversations happened, in the way my grandfather had always said the property would earn me the right to do. Marcus listened to all of it. When I finished, he sat with the specific stillness of a man doing the kind of accounting that has nothing to do with numbers. He said, "Delia." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I took up a lot of space." I said, "You did." He said, "You let me." And I said, "I let a lot of things go that I shouldn't have. That's mine too." He looked at me. He said, "What do you want to do now?" I said, "I want to settle the estate correctly. I want the property managed in a way that reflects actual ownership. I want to have real conversations about what this family has and what we're going to do with it going forward. And I want to have those conversations as equals." He said, "Okay." I said, "Okay." He said, "Yeah, Delia. Okay." He said it the way my father had said things that he meant and knew would hold, without drama, without performance, just a word that meant what it said. I looked at my brother across my mother's kitchen table. He was not a bad man. He had been a man who had taken up the space that was offered to him without examining how much space that left for everyone else. That is a different thing. It is a correctable thing. It requires honesty and time and the specific willingness to see something new about yourself that you are not going to enjoy seeing. He was seeing it. That was the beginning. Let me tell you what I did in the weeks that followed. Cecile prepared the formal documentation of the property ownership. The estate was reopened for proper administration. The 35 years of income was calculated. A fair arrangement was reached. Not contentious, not dramatic. Marcus and I sat across a conference table and worked through it with the specific practical focus of two people who have decided that the relationship is more important than the advantage, and that the only way to preserve the relationship is to be honest about the advantage. I took the role of estate executor officially, not because I needed the title, is because the title made visible something that had been true and invisible for 35 years. It was accurate. The record deserved to be accurate. My mother came to the first estate meeting at Cecile's office. She sat beside me at the conference table. She had not been to a formal financial meeting about the family's assets in 35 years of marriage. She listened with the full attention of a woman encountering something she should have encountered long ago, and who is not wasting the opportunity by being defensive about the lateness of the arrival. At the end of the meeting, she said to Cecile, "I would like to understand these documents, all of them." "Can you explain them to me?" Cecile said. "Of course." She spent an hour with my mother after Marcus and I had left, going through the documents, and I know this because Cecile called me afterward and said, "Your mother has a good head for this. You got it from somewhere." I said, "I know where I got it." She said, "From both of them, Delia. Your father gave you the head. Your mother gave you the persistence. She just gave it to the wrong things for too long." I thought about that for a long time. I want to tell you about the Sunday dinner that happened 6 weeks after the estate meeting. My mother had started hosting Sunday dinners again. Not immediately after my father died. She had needed time. But by the end of the 2nd month, she had called Marcus and me and said she wanted people back in the house. And would we come? We came. The first dinner was the first dinner. Careful and warm and slightly too quiet in the way of things that are finding their new shape, and the second dinner was better. The third dinner, which was the one I want to tell you about, had 14 people. Marcus and his wife and their 2 sons, a cousin who had driven from Alexandria, 2 of my mother's friends from church, Cecile, who had become in the previous months something closer to family than to friend, in the specific way that happens when someone has sat with you through the hardest thing and has not looked away. After dinner, my mother stood up. She said, "I want to say something." The table went quiet. She said, "I want to acknowledge something in front of the people at this table who matter to me." She looked at me. She said, "My daughter Delia has been the financial architect of this family for most of her adult life. She structured the refinancing that saved the Front Street properties in 2006. She managed the practice billing in the 90s, when we would have been in serious trouble without her. She is the executor of your grandfather's estate, and the reason the estate will be settled correctly." She said, "I did not say these things while her father was alive, when they should have been said. I am saying them now, because the record should be accurate, and because Delia deserves to be seen in this family, the way she has always been seen by her father, and the way I should have ensured she was seen by everyone else." The table was quiet. My cousin from Alexandria said, "Aunt Gloria, we didn't know." My mother said, "I know you didn't. That was my doing, and I am correcting it." She looked at me. She said, "Delia, you have your grandfather's property sense and your father's head for numbers, and something that belongs entirely to yourself, which is the specific willingness to do the work without requiring the room to notice." I noticed. I just didn't say so. I am saying so now. I looked at my mother. I have said before that I did not cry at my father's funeral. That was true. I cried at the Sunday dinner table, not dramatically, the quiet kind, the kind that arrives when something that should have happened a long time ago finally happens, and your body recognizes the arrival before your mind does. My mother reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She did not say anything. The hand was enough. The hand was, in the specific language of the Fontaine family, the whole sentence. Let me tell you where things are now. The estate is settled, so the property is correctly registered. The income from the Front Street storefronts flows accurately to the people it belongs to, which has always been Marcus and me in equal shares, and which will now be recorded as such in perpetuity. I have taken on the formal management of the properties, not because Marcus is incapable, because I am the one with the head for it, and we both know it, and we are now in a family where that knowing is spoken rather than understood in silence. Marcus called me last month on a Tuesday evening. I was doing what I often do on Tuesday evenings, which is sitting at my kitchen table, going over numbers that belong to one project or another, the specific, comfortable occupation of someone who has always found that numbers behave honestly if you pay them proper attention. He said, "Delia, I've been thinking." And I said, "About what?" He said, "About how much easier things would have been if we'd been doing this together from the beginning. The properties, the practice stuff, all of it." I said, "Yes, they would have." He said, "I didn't know what I didn't know." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have asked." I said, "You should have. And you're asking now. That's the right direction." He said, "How's the portfolio looking?" I told him. We talked for 40 minutes about the properties and what they could become, and what our grandfather had understood about the table. The property earned you a seat at, and what we were going to do with the seat now that we were both sitting in it. It was the best conversation I had ever had with my brother, not because we resolved everything, because we were having it honestly. The two of us, in the same accounting, and with the same numbers on the table, and no one being credited for someone else's work. That is what correction looks like. Not dramatic, not triumphant. Two people on the phone on a Tuesday evening, talking honestly for the first time in 42 years. There is a photograph in the blue box that I did not mention when I described its contents. I found it at the very bottom, underneath the letter. A photograph from 1987, the year my grandfather died. It shows Big Douglas in his chair in the front room of the Nachitoches house. He is 81 years old in the photograph. He has the specific solidity of a man who has worked with his body for 30 years, and whose body still carries that work, even in stillness. Beside him, at his feet, is a little girl. The little girl is 5 years old. She is holding a composition notebook, and she is showing him something in it. He is looking at it with the specific attention of a man who recognizes what he is looking at. The expression on his face is the same expression my father wore across the kitchen table when I was working through the long division problems. The expression is not surprise. It is recognition. He had seen it before I had, before my father had said it, before any room had acknowledged it. The 5-year-old with the composition notebook and the head for how things fit together had been recognized by the man who understood that property earns you the right to sit at the table where the real conversations happen. He had made sure of it. In 1987, in the estate documents, in the equal split, as in the blue box that he had filled, and that my father had kept, and that my father had told me to find before my brother could. 3 generations of men who understood what they had. And finally, on a Tuesday morning in an attic in Nachitoches, the woman who had always had it too, holding the proof in her hands. I keep the photograph on my desk, not the blue box. I gave the box back to my mother. She keeps it in the kitchen now, on the counter beside the window that faces the garden. She keeps it where she can see it, She said it helps her remember to look at the right things. I think that is the most her she has ever been. I think my father would agree. Here is what I know now, that I did not know before the attic and the blue box, and the 14-page letter, and the Sunday dinner, and the Tuesday phone call, and the invisibility was not mine. I did not make myself invisible. I was made invisible by an arrangement so old and so established that the people maintaining it had ceased to see it as a choice. My mother was not choosing to minimize me. She was breathing the air of an arrangement she had inherited and had never been required to examine. My father was not choosing to fail me. He was managing the peace of a household in a way that required him to let the credit go elsewhere, and that he had recognized too late, at 58, as a failure he needed to document. The invisibility was not mine, but becoming visible again was, and becoming visible did not require fury or destruction or the burning down of the family's comfortable arrangements. It required a conversation, and then another conversation, and then a letter read out loud to a woman who needed to hear it, and a document placed on a table, and a brother who asked the right question when he was finally given the right information. It required patience, not the patience of someone who accepts what is not fair, the patience of someone who is waiting until they have the full picture before they speak, until they have what they need to say, the true thing clearly, and without destruction. My grandfather bought 3 storefronts on Front Street in 1971 because he understood that property earns you the right to sit at the table where the real conversations happen. My father gave me the head for numbers, and the composition notebook, and the long division problems, and 14 pages of handwritten honesty in a blue box. And my mother gave me the persistence and the hands on the table at Sunday dinner, and the specific courage of a woman acknowledging at 68 years old that she had been looking at the wrong things and was correcting her vision. My brother gave me, finally, the honest Tuesday phone call. Cecile gave me the friend who puts on her coat without being asked. And my grandfather, Big Douglas, gave me something none of them knew he had given me. He saw me first. In 1987, in the estate documents, in the equal split, in the photograph with the composition notebook. He saw me first. That is the whole thing. That is the only thing. Being seen first by someone who understands what they are looking at is the foundation that everything else is built on. Build on it. Whatever the foundation is in your life, whatever the person is who saw you first, like whatever the blue box is that is waiting on the 3rd shelf from the left, behind the Christmas things. Find it. Open it. Build on it. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. You were not invisible. You were placed where the light didn't reach. The day you carry your own light into the room is the day the arrangement changes permanently. Find what was left for you. Build on it. That is the whole instruction.